Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NDIS Business Breakthrough Podcast. In this episode, we are sitting down with the lovely Kylee Leota, founder and Chief Vision Officer of Elements for Success, a global organization transforming the way individuals, teams, and organizations lead and grow. Welcome, Kylee.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Vanessa, so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Right, I would love to dive right in. And
Sure.
could you share with us or take us back to the beginning? What experiences in your early career as an educator sparked your passion for leadership and development?
Yeah, so it was very interesting because I was never one of those people that went, oh my gosh, I want to be the CEO of an organization. That was like when I grow up, I want to be, that was never on the top of the list. But my very first teaching role I ever got, I wanted to make some changes and couldn't. And I'm like, right, where do I go? What do I have to do to be the person that's able to make the changes that I believe needed to be happening at that particular time? So it kind of set off a bit of a passion for me around, it wasn't about I guess, the recognition or the position per se. It was around where I could have influence. And over time, it was about getting that seat at the table and being able to do that. And I recognized that whilst we would like to think within organizations that we've got a democratic kind of operating system, in many organizations, there's a big hierarchy. And so sometimes, depending on where you sit in the position, you don't have that level of influence, even though you've got great ideas and even though you've got solutions and even though all of those things. So that kind of set off that trajectory. And each of my promotions came about into different leadership roles and up the echelons came about from needing to create more influence to be more impactful and empowering people along the way.
Oh my gosh, I love that. But it was, yeah, about wanting to improve things rather than just like, oh, I want to earn more money or I just want to be the lead.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
yeah. And it was always about having an impact, not only for in school, it was like kids and stuff like that, but also the staff that I had. I was fiercely protective of everybody under my purview.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, you wear the title Chief Vision Officer. How do
Mm.
you define that role and what does an average day look like at Elements for Success?
Oh, goodness me. I don't know if I could describe an average day. I haven't had one yet in 5 years, so I'm not really sure there is such a thing. But Chief Vision Officer came about from the fact that I guess one of the things that I have recognized in my leadership style is I am quite visionary and I have this, I talk about out of the box solutions to traditional problems kind of idea. So I've always just had a very big passion and I can often see like down here, ahead of the game where things are going and what they're doing. So that vision piece was around, I'm really, really passionate about bringing vision to life, again, to serve and empower others. And the name of my business, Elements for Success, actually comes from Earl Nightingale's definition of success, which is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And so for me, this part of success was, what does progressive realization look like for me of what are my worthy goals? And how do I support people to achieve those? And it's not a one size fits all model. So there's lots of different elements for that and helping bespoke that to what people needed given their own individual journey, but where they are in the organization and where their organization is in that in journey. In terms of a typical day, oh look, I can go from dealing with hospitals and police and psychiatrists to sitting in a leadership meeting with CEOs of boards and providing advice and guidance around that, delivering psychological safety training, being on a podcast, to writing for my next book. I released my own book at the end of last year and got a bit of a bug for it. So, and then everything in between seeing clients and just making sure that I'm connecting and collaborating with services, again, to wrap around clients to make sure that everyone is on the same page to make sure that the best outcomes are possible for everybody.
Amazing, doing it all. And keeping the variety happening for you there.
For sure. I think, I think I reflected on why I lasted so long in education. So I was in education for 20 years before I transferred out into my own business. And I often think, had I been teaching English, I don't think I would have lasted as long. But I think because my background is disability, complex behavior, and trauma, every day was a new day and every day was a lot of variety. And I think that's the only way I sustained in an environment like that for so long, is because I had the opportunity to have some autonomy and agency and be creative in the way that I structured that to get best outcomes for people.
Mm.
So I think that's a really important, and I think understanding what you need in a role allows you to craft that for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. In that, I find that with myself, exactly like you say, and knowing
Mm.
what you need to have some variety, and because otherwise we can get bored, can't we? We need to, yeah.
Yeah, and look, there are some people that like the consistency and the stability of doing stuff, and that's great. Everyone needs people like that on their team. You also need the people that like the bit of variety, because that's where the innovation comes from also.
Mm,
So I think it's about working complementary to each other's strengths. I mean, being able to hold space for that. But I think the good thing about people that can juggle a few balls is that they can be doing what they're doing and also predicting into the future and setting things up to pave the way for people as they're coming along.
yeah, wonderful. So, can you walk us through the core pillars of the Infinite Leadership Framework?
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, I'm so passionate about this. I'm just going to get so excited. So, and this came about from my own leadership journey. Like most people, we often get thrust into leadership positions because we're good at the job that we're doing. And we don't often, I often joke that in Australia, we do it quite asked about. We do it backwards. We give you the job in leadership and expect you to sink or swim, and then maybe we'll give you some training along the way. And so I was a very early leader. I was promoted within my fourth year of education. So I was already, in leadership positions very, very young. And what I wished I had known were these things that I've created in this infinite leadership pillars. And so the first one is identity. And I think our identity is ever evolving, but we can get stuck on things, that labels that people bestow upon us. You're too young, you're too old, you're too this, you're too that. And so understanding ourselves and going back to that part we were talking about earlier about people, some people like to juggle a lot of balls, some people don't. We have to understand ourselves. So if we're going to lead others, we've got to lead ourselves. And if we're going to lead ourselves, we actually have to know ourselves and be okay with what that looks like. And Vusi Thembakweo says, identity is man-made, so thereby it can be man-changed. So if there's something that's not working for you, you actually have the power, and you might need somebody to hold space for you as you navigate this journey. But even as a business owner, from who I was when I first started business to where I am now, is my identity is completely changed because it's an ongoing evolution. And that's the thing about infinite leadership, is it's an ongoing evolution for continuous improvement, and that's why you can keep going back and over these pillars all the time, because who you are in 6 months' time is not who you are when you looked at this point. So it's that reframing it all the way through. Nurturing is about our emotional agility and our emotional intelligence. And one of the things that we've done really a lot of work on, and I joke that DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy in psychological terms, which is about understanding our behaviors and stuff like that. But I have another DBT, and it's diagnosis by TikTok. And that's because people watch all these shows on, watch all these things on all these influencers talk about their emotions and their feelings. But we don't do the second part of that, is how to apply it respectfully and in practice sometimes. And so we may have a bit of better understanding of how we feel, but we don't know how to apply that into meetings when we're hijacked and when we're working in high complex environments. And look, the NDIS is, if nothing, complex. Everything's moving at such a fast pace. People are trying to get invoices paid. People are trying to make sure that their staff are okay while getting it's just a complicated space. So if you don't understand how you react in places of high stress, and you don't understand your own emotional triggers and your ability to have that agility to pivot when that's going on for you, then you're going to really struggle. So that nurturing pillar is about that. Fearlessness is around not the absence of fear, but it's about identifying the fear and moving through it to the other side. And, we talk about, there's the Native American buffaloes are the only animals that run towards a storm. Most other animals run away. And so what happens, a bit like fear, is that the more we try and run away from it, it's definitely going to catch up with us at some point. We end up sitting in it for longer. Buffaloes don't love a storm. They just know that if they're going to run towards it, they're going to get through it faster. So
Mm,
how do we identify those fears and move through them a lot better? Then we've got innovation. So how to be innovative thinkers, and that means holding space for diverse ways of thought and different ideas. And, that's what this collegial community that you're working on is, how do we be innovative with what we've got? It's not always about having more money or more resources or, those kind of things. There's lots of different ways, and working together, we can come up with more innovative practices. Then we've got nobility, which is about, a lot about the fact that, NDIS was designed by nature. The people that are doing well in NDIS come from a service-based heart about serving others. And as a byproduct, we are fortunate to make an income from it and create better outcomes for ourselves as a result of creating better outcomes for people. The people that are struggling with that is where their ego is getting in the way, or they're not coming from that service-based heart and they're focused on the money and forgetting that, this is a very important role that we have in this particular space. And when our egos get in the way, and I had an organization that really let their ego get in the way, and they ended up losing $500,000 of recurring revenue because they didn't want to collaborate with others. That's so scary, and that's just ego getting in the way. Then we've got influence, so that communication stuff. But how do we create psychological safety in our organizations, particularly when you're working in organizations, and particularly support worker industries where you've got agencies where you're working with really complex people? It's not just about creating physical safety, but it's about creating psychological safety, about how can we speak up and how can we improve conditions and how can we work through that and hold space for those kind of things. Then we've got transformation, and then we've also got ecosystem. So how do we find the right ecosystem to support us? Because life is not about scarcity. Life is about working collegially together to rise up. And we can do that by creating a really strong and solid ecosystem. So that's a very, very simplistic view of the pillars that we've got in infinite leadership. But as an organization, you can pick one pillar and go, okay, what's our identity? Or you can actually look at all the pillars and look at the interplay. And you might focus each quarter on a different pillar. You might go, okay, so we've got the identity piece. We know who we are. We know what we stand for. We know what we're doing. We know where we're going. But we don't actually have that collegiality. So we need to look at our ecosystem and reflect if the ecosystem we've currently got is serving us to get to the next place. Or are we having lots of, are we being hijacked by all of these things that are going on in NDIS at the moment, and we're finding ourselves being reactive versus proactive? So, you can have a look at it in so many different ways. And then next year, you can revisit them all again because you're going to be in a different place in your journey. And that's what I mean about that infinite ongoing opportunity for continuous improvement. And it's about creating excellence for everybody, because if everybody rises, then the organization rises and you're going to get better outcomes rather than one person being the standalone person that rises.
Yeah. No, amazing. And which pillar would you say that leaders struggle with the most, and how do you help them break through that barrier?
So I always say to people, like, the way that I've written my book is that you could pick up any pillar at any stage and just pick it up and read. That's how it's designed for. But I always say start with identity, because if you don't know who you are, you won't recognize how you're getting hijacked all the time by different things that are happening. So, for example, if you've got a really strong core value, and I can give a really good example of this. I came back from a meeting one day and I have a really core value around integrity. So if I'm asked to walk out of alignment with integrity, or I'm in a space where the people around me are not acting with integrity, my core value is triggered and I do not show up as my best self. I'm going to be honest. And so I can remember coming back from a meeting and being so irate at what had happened. And people that had different core values from me actually going, oh yeah, that's not great, but didn't have that same visceral reaction. And I'm like, why? Why are you not, ready to do the charge the same way I am? And so understanding that part of myself really helped me understand how I show up when I'm walking in alignment with myself, my true self, and what happens when I'm put in positions where I'm walking out of alignment with myself. But up until that point of recognizing that, I was constantly being put in positions over and over and over and over again because I was unconsciously existing versus consciously being aware of what's going on and how understanding myself so that I could lead more effectively.
Mm. Interesting. That is my highest value too. So
Yeah, there you go. Well, we've always been aligned ever since we've spoken, so that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense. And I think, I would like to think that it would be, regardless of whether it's your top two core values, I think in this industry, it really needs to be one of the core values. Again, to be a highly effective leader and to have a really sustainable practice, integrity has to sit high. If it doesn't, I guess that would be a reflective point of understanding your own identity and how that's impacting the success or the non-success you're having in business.
Yeah, definitely agree on that one. So you've guided thousands of people through this model. Is there a transformation story that perfectly captures its impact?
I have seen people get multiple promotions from doing this work. I have seen people, I had a young person. So, I do leaders and corporate, but I actually have young people that I still, once a teacher, always a teacher, I think. And so, I'm still passionate about my young people. And I feel like, they're the leaders of tomorrow, right? So I guess I always sit there and go, oh man, I wish I'd known this when I was 16, 17, 18 years of age, right? So I've got two stories that come to mind. One of them's a young person with multiple diagnoses who had been written off by the system. And through doing this work, he went from failing his subjects at school to passing and getting an early entry into a scholarship at university with a system that had told him that he wouldn't become anything and he wouldn't be able to do all this kind of stuff. So he got accepted into early entry, he got a scholarship. And again, it was understanding who he was and doing these pillars to help him set himself up for success. So that's a really amazing. I'm so proud of him. He's like one of my star people that I talk about all the time. And I guess what I have seen, I'm working with an organization at the moment where there's a significant amount of staff that are working with participants. And what I'm seeing is reduced incidences in behaviors in the house. So I'm seeing reduced burnout from staff because we're helping them understand how this works for them so that they can manage themselves in a highly complex environment rather than constantly putting everything back onto the participants to navigate and manage and them being, kind of seen as the problem, but really helping their staff develop better practices to be able to have sustainable successes within that organization.
Oh, that's just wonderful. That they're both fantastic stories, and so I can totally relate to the first one. Like I feel that's where I'm at with one of my own children. So that
Yeah.
I can just imagine that result that those parents and how much they thank you for that. Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, then my own experience in having an NDIS business and having staff and trying to make sure that they're looking after themselves and having those skills to be able to deal with challenging situations and trying to not let it affect their personal lives too much. So that's yeah, amazing results.
Yeah, and I always talk about, the idea of the infinite leadership is to create a model so that you can reflect, review, and recalibrate as often as you need, right? So it's about creating space for that. And where things have been really successful is when we can reflect on something, we can review it and go, is it working? Is it not working? And if required, we can recalibrate that process. And it's very simplistic, but it's very effective because we overcomplicate so many things, I think. Systems and again, many organizations operate a large majority of the time from the reactive,
Mm,
putting out fires, and that's exhausting.
yeah.
I was working with one organization and I said to one of the ladies who's one of the leaders, I said, oh, so just ballpark figure percentage this week you've been operating in reactive versus proactive. And she's like 100%. And I'm
Wow.
like, aren't you tired? And she goes, absolutely. And so we were able to flip that script a little bit, being able to move people off potentially managing underperformance by understanding this process and helping people have that agency over themselves to do the work.
Yeah, yeah. That's huge. And yeah, it can definitely be the nature of the industry in trying, yeah, that you're putting out fires, but you're absolutely right. It's having things in place so when those fires do come up, you already know what you're doing to be able to handle them.
Yeah.
Mm. So,
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think that people outside of the industry, so I've been in disability for 30 years, disability complex behavior and trauma. I'm old. So I've been around pre-NDIS.
yeah.
I've been around, the deinstitutionalization of organizations in Queensland. I was art support worker at the time doing that kind of work. I've worked in schools that have been set on fire by kids with disabilities. I've been punched, I've been kicked, so one of the things I think that is very impactful is when you're talking to people in this business is actually knowing what they're going through because you've done it. When somebody comes in, and there might be some really great people out there, but part of the disconnect is people go, you actually don't know what I go through on my day-to-day work. And so people want to feel seen and heard and valued all of the time. And when you can't conceptualize what they've gone through, it's really hard for you to have the impact, even if you've got the skills to do the transformation. I think the big difference is they want someone who's been in the ditches with them and they actually get how hard this role is and how hard this work is, despite all the rewards that come with it.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And that's why I always had the leadership program of internally moving staff into leadership, because they had that hands-on experience, like you say, in the trenches, the doing. And so moving into that leadership role, they've experienced it. They know then what their staff are going through because that was their days. It's huge value. So leading with authenticity is central to your message. What does authenticity look like in practice when the pressure is on?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I was talking to someone the other day, and they actually rang me and we were having a bit of a conversation, and they were reading my book. And they said, Kylee, your book feels like just sitting across the table and having a conversation with you, right? So it's like, they're like, it's quite mind-blowing, actually. And I think the fact is that the most authentic people, I worked in an organization for 20 years where you had to leave yourself at the gate. And you had to walk in and you had to do this job and you had to leave, right? So what I wanted when I was creating my business was to be the same person I am in the business as I am out of it. So if you saw me down the street, you would get the same conversation with me as if you were talking to me through the business, right? I think one of the things that, again, that goes back to this identity piece is when you talk about that under pressure piece, is you actually have to know what you look like under pressure. Because to enable you to stay in your authentic self is actually understanding and reading those cues earlier, so you catch yourself most of the time and actually sitting there going, right. So I had a conversation with my own young people last night going, hey, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed at the moment. So I recognize that I am doing this, whatever. And it's not to say that you won't do behaviors that are not, fabulous, but it's about identifying it and owning it. And I think that's the most authentic thing that you can do, because you're actually modeling the way for others and giving them permission to do the same. And, I had a conversation with somebody just before, and they were just talking about feeling embarrassed and ashamed about something. And I said, so is this something that you've decided for yourself that's happening, or somebody actually said that to you? And they're like, no, doing it to myself. So, they were feeling inauthentic about something. And I said, so if you've done this to yourself, what can you do to walk back in alignment? So part of it is, again, that identity piece is so strong, because you actually have to know what authentic looks like for you to know if you're walking in and out of it. And the more that you are aware of what it does look like, because a lot of examples, I don't know about you, but in my leadership journey, I had a lot of examples of the leader I didn't want to be, less of the example of the leaders I did want to be. So I could tell you that I didn't want to be that type of leader. I didn't want to be the yelling leader. I didn't want to be this kind of leader, or the emotional roller coaster leader. I didn't want, those ones. We've all had them. But I had a bit of a blank slate, this big black hole of what good leadership looked like. So for my journey, in terms of being an authentic leader, was trying on different things and seeing if they fit, and then, keep implementing them if they felt right and authentic for myself. And once you start being able to give yourself permission to be authentic, it's amazing what happens.
Let's pause for a moment to talk about resources that can help you scale your NDIS business. Have you downloaded my free NDIS Business Growth Blueprint yet? It's a step-by-step guide designed to help you simplify compliance, streamline your operations, and grow your business with confidence. And if you're looking for more personalised support, my Bestie in Business membership is exactly what you need. You'll get group coaching, virtual co-working sessions, and tailored strategies to help you thrive in the NDIS space. You can find the links to both the freebie and the membership in the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode of NDIS Business Breakthrough with Vanessa Norman.
It's amazing how your leadership changes and evolves, and it becomes a more sustainable practice. when you are walking in alignment with your authentic self versus this vision of yourself about who you think you need to be successful as a leader.
It just makes life and everything so much easier, doesn't it? Then
100%.
yeah.
And I used to come home, particularly towards the end of my career in education, because it was starting to operate out of alignment with my true north. I was tired, I was grumpy, I was irritable, and my kids got the worst of me because I was sitting there masking all day at this job that was no longer in alignment. So now we have lots of laughter, we have lots of fun because I love laughing, I love fun, right? We have a lot more of that now, that I'm able to be in a role where I can create this authentic nature for myself. So I'm authentic at work, and that allows me to be more authentic in alignment with myself at home.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, purpose-driven leadership can sometimes clash with rapid-fire business targets. How do you help executives to balance profit and purpose?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do in the identity pillar is we understand our why. And then so understanding your personal why, but also creating an organizational why. So Simon Sinek does a tribal why around what is our organizational why, and that's co-created. But first of all, we have to understand our own personal why. And because what we want is, Jim Collins in his book Good to Great talks about having the right people in the right positions on the bus so that, everything goes in alignment. Because if your personal why is in direct contradiction to the organizational why, then it's a misalignment. And so how do you know that you got the right people on your team? Because if you don't have the right people on the team, your profit is going to constantly be affected by this space. So finding people that have a shared common vision and purpose, and then understanding what the behaviors and activities look like around that is going to allow you more alignment, which will then improve your ROIs, which will then improve those profits for you. And if there's a misalignment, so, coming through some of the new policies and things that are coming through that are changing faster than we can change our underwear at the moment, is that's constantly causing that recalibration that I was talking about earlier, reflect, review, and recalibrate. So if we've got a strong purpose, how does this align? And just constantly, how often do we set a vision and then leave it and don't actually come back and revisit it? How often do we need to come back and revisit? And, when there's rapid fire things coming all the time that are kind of out of your control and they're kind of coming over the top, then maybe it is weekly, monthly, quarterly, versus once a year we sit down and do this really nice activity around that shared common vision piece. And again, that's being proactive versus reactive, coming back and recalibrating that over and over again so that we are walking in alignment and purpose, and also recalibrating. So this is our why. What are the behaviors that we do that align with that why, rather than, so many leaders that I see struggle with not walking their talk. So they'll say one thing in the shared vision planning day, and then there's a massive misalignment between their behaviors. I remember this leader once, and he talked about having a say-do gap and having a very short thing between what you say and what you do. And then he had the biggest say-do gap ever out of one of the leadership that I had to date. He would say one thing and do the complete opposite, right? So then you lose trust, you lose psychological safety, you lose influence, you lose all of those things that then impact your profit, because you have high turnover, you have lower engagement rates, you have people dialing it in and just showing up but not really engaged in the work. So, recalibrating that often and as frequently as needed so that people feel a sense of purpose, they feel valued, and they are aligning that. And that's where you'll get the growth, because you'll have a stronger sense of engagement.
It's something that I even went through myself recently and had a bit of a light bulb moment. It's, I can get a bit distracted with bright, shiny object syndrome.
Relatable.
And it was actually sitting down and going, I'd gotten on this, great idea. And I was halfway down that tunnel of that bright, shiny idea. And then I had the realization of, hang on a second, this actually doesn't align with my why. And I needed to rewind, and I needed to, it made me stop and go, okay, I actually need to make this a process of assessing any new idea or any any road I'm wanting to go down where I actually need to stop and ask myself some questions around, does this align with my why? And as much as it sounds like this amazing, great idea, is this why I started my business? And it was, yeah, which very much is around my family and my time with my family and taking on more than I can chew and all of those kinds of things and going, yeah, okay, I need to really, yeah, like you say, taking us back to our why and does this decision align with the goals and the values and the vision? So,
Yeah, and I think one of the things that happens is we are bombarded with so much stuff every day. Like shiny object syndrome is rapid because it's every single day. You only have to get on any platform on social media and you sit there and go, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Right. So being able to sit there with your why and actually go back and go, right. So my question would be, does my why need revisiting if this is something that I'm really drawn to, or do I need to find a collaborative partner and hand it off because I think it's very valuable, but I'm not the person to deliver that.
mm,
And that's a really hard reflection because our natural instinct is to want to be the person. And that's going back to that nobility pillar is our own ego gets in the way of us showing up because, oh, that looks good. Oh, people will like that. I want to do this thing instead of actually stepping back and going, hang on a second. What's the goal that I'm trying to achieve here? And does that thing align with my ability to do that? If I would like to do this thing, what would that look like, sound like, and feel like? And does that then align with my why? If there's something that takes a huge investment of your time and your core value is around family, then is it a short-term and long-term investment of your time? Or is it going to be this pervasive thing that gets out of control really quickly?
mm,
And so, whilst it might feel disappointing in the first instance, being able to let that go through the keeper, or if you're really passionate about it, find a collaborative partner and work with them on it so that you can input to your level of capacity. Because what happens is when we overcommit, we end up doing the thing that we don't want to do, which is let people down.
exactly.
And so then we feel a whole heap of shame and guilt around that also. And that's not to say that can't be involved in some way, but you don't, one of the biggest things I learned in leadership was around the fact that the ship needs to run without me. That's actually successful and sustainable leadership. If I'm the person that has to do it all the time and be the person all the time, then that's my ego running roughshod. And I was working with a lady one day and we were talking about the fact that she wanted a promotion and she actually went to her boss to get released from her position to apply for a promotion. And her boss said no. And she was so upset and she was so disheartened by the whole thing. And I said, but why did she say no? She said, because you're the only person that can do this job, right? Now, for her, she'd created that because she needed to be needed. And so once we identified that she was getting in her own way to go for promotion because she had not set up a succession plan, she had not set up a development, because it was serving her ego to be the golden girl that solved all these problems. Once we started that succession planning, and then she came to me a few weeks later and she'd been out at a training all day. And I said, how are you going? She goes, I feel terrible. And I'm like, why? She goes, no one called me today. I said, great job. And she's like, but it feels weird. And I said, yes, because you created a position where you needed to be needed. And now you've done the succession planning, which will give you the opportunity to go for the promotion. And that's what sustainable leadership is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But it's uncomfortable in the first instance because we like to be the person.
Yeah. Take some getting used to.
100%. And now I can I do a lot of collaborative work and I don't need to be the person that delivers. Even in education, we used to have some relationships with community organizations and, some people go in there and say, oh, this person has to come. I'm like, I'll just give you the information. You can tell them. And if they need me, I'm around if you need anything.
Yeah.
Right. Because what that does is it builds trust because we haven't let our ego run roughshod over the outcome, which is that person getting the help and support that they need. It doesn't always have to be me, the person that delivers it.
Yeah. Now,
and for some people, I will be the right fit. Sorry.
No, you're right. You're right. So, in terms of what you do deliver and your programs, you work worldwide. Have you noticed any cultural differences in how leadership challenges show up, and does your approach shift accordingly?
So it's interesting because globally, I think the challenge still is that we have a very poor implementation of psychological safety organizationally. So that's kind of across global organizations, is the ones that are doing really well have a really strong sense of psychological safety, and are implementing, not tokenistically. I went to this really cool training once and we ticked the box to say that we were psychologically safe, implementing psychologically safe practices. And I run training on that for any organization that wants to do it authentically. I'm super passionate about that because that is a foundational piece. If you don't have that, all the other stuff is ridiculously hard to implement and sustain. So I think that what I notice globally is that people are doing it tough. I think mental health is a huge issue. I think, and again, that comes back to psychological safe environments. But I think that one of the things that I see is that there are nuances within cultures. So, there are certainly cultures that are what I would call collectivist cultures, where, the group is more important than the individual. And then there's certain cultures like white Australian culture where the individual tends to be recognized more than the group. So how do we create that balance? We have to understand culturally responsive practice when we're working in organizations. I do work in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. I do work in Pacific Island communities. I do work overseas in Indian culture. I do American, I do lots of different things. So don't profess to go in knowing it all. And I think also, create a psychologically safe environment where you as a leader can actually ask the questions rather than assume that you know everything. Because I think we still get into the trap as leaders that we think we have to know it all, or people will think less of us. But people will give us higher regard for the fact that we care enough to ask and to check in, versus assume those kind of things. So, but I think foundationally, the biggest thing that I see in organizations that are doing well versus others is they've got a strong embedded psychologically soft culture within their organizations. And the ones that aren't doing well, I was talking to an organization the other day and they, oh, there's no problems. I'm like, is there no problems, or is just nobody talking about the problems?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about all these things that aren't working, but nobody's having the conversation around boundaries. No one's having the conversation about respecting time. No one's having a conversation about that because everyone's too scared of upsetting people. That's not a psychologically safe organization. So if we get that right, all the other pieces of the work will fall into place and be much easier to manage and get the return on investment happening faster, because we'll have a platform of how to do business rather than just what we're focusing on.
Yeah. So what trends are you seeing right now in global leadership that either excites or worries you the most?
I'm seeing some global trends that I'm seeing are really high levels of burnout and disengagement.
Yeah.
Massive. And so, I feel like people thought after COVID, life would be easier. And I feel like it's like every year it's just gone, here, hold my beer. I'm just going to level up. So there's a lot of increasing complexity. I do some work with some colleagues around the new legislation that are coming in, and people not understanding the legislation well enough to implement it safely for people. And that's causing a whole heap of stuff as well. I feel like since COVID, the amount of people that are getting additional diagnoses is exponential, yet organizations don't know how to do it well. And so we've got a whole generation that are coming from being able to get support in school for having a diagnosis, and then they go into the workforce and there's no really good process for setting them up with the adjustments that they need to be successful. So we've gone from attempting in schools, not always well, but we've gone from attempting to set people up for success to expecting people to be successful and to have the self-awareness about what they need and, managing all that kind of stuff. I think there's a global trend that feels, I don't know, it just feels like people just are expected to know stuff versus understand that it's an ongoing learning opportunity.
Yeah.
What excites me is around the fact that when I get the opportunity to speak to people around different things, I am seeing people sharing some of the same challenges, and I just feel like it's about bringing people together rather than operating in silos. So I think there's some solutions, and there's people like yourself that are really passionate about moving away from siloed businesses and working collaboratively and effectively to support and grow each other. So that's really exciting when I get to see that.
Yeah. So what would you say? I guess many organizations rely on like one-off workshops. Why is sustained development journey more effective than a training day mentality?
Yeah, because we go back to business as usual and we forget because the chaos of what we're doing overrides that really cool thing that we did last week.
Yeah.
And so, in the workshops that I run, we do some follow-up reflective practice. I love doing workshops where there's a coaching component afterwards or beforehand. So again, so the workshop itself is about building knowledge and capacity. And then the follow-up is around sustainable practices, about what does that look like in the real world outside of this really cool, beautiful, conference that we went to with really good food. Because now I've got the optimal environment for my learning, but how do I implement?
Yeah.
And how do I implement in context? And who do I go to have those brave and courageous conversations around what's working and what's not working? And I think that's the bit that I'm seeing is people, there's a saying that says knowledge is actually only potential power. There's knowledge is power, but it's really only potential power, because if you don't know how to implement it successfully, then it's kind of a wasted opportunity. So how do we support that? And that's where I think workshops are wonderful. They're great at developing some excitement about something that's coming through. And if they're done well, like I'm a pretty passionate facilitator, and if they're done well, you will get that sense of energy, and you'll get that, people aren't going to go away feeling flat. They're going to go away feeling excited. But 24 hours later, 48, 72 hours later, they're back into their real life. And we've got this competing priorities about this really cool thing that I know versus what I'm currently existing with. And people need support to be able to navigate and move through that. And the people that do the coaching afterwards, and people that do engage in that system, get better outcomes. And because they're getting lower turnover, they're getting higher engagement, they're getting better profitability, they're getting all of the things that happen because now we've got a sustainable model. Because it takes 3 to 5 times somebody's annual salary to replace them, right? By the time you advertise, train up, and all that kind of stuff, the cost of high turnover is a huge issue within organizations. So how do we do that? We've got to do the onboarding process well. We've got to make sure that they've got the capacity and the capability, and we've got to continue to give them that. The generation that's coming through, a lot of them, it's not just about the money. Money's important, but it's that quality of workspace, not just what we do.
Yeah, 100%. I think you've nailed it there. Even with my own programs, we have the educational piece, the workshop, and then we always come back together then for the Q&A piece, the implementing, what's come up for you from that, from what you've learned, and let's talk about that. So yeah, I think that's definitely, like you say, I think it's the whole implementation piece. So looking ahead 5 years, what's the boldest goal that you have for your organization?
My boldest goal is to be in all the continents of the globe, delivering the work that I do to support and empower others to be able to serve others more powerfully.
Oh, I love that. And I can see it. Absolutely. You'll be jet setting everywhere. Love it.
Yeah.
And finally, if listeners could take just one actionable step today to lead more authentically, what would you recommend?
Besides booking in one of my workshops, I think I would really encourage people to ask and reflect on, I'm going to be cheeky, 2 things. One is their own identity and those values that we talked about. But secondly, I would ask people to reflect on, what does psychological safety look like for me? And the 4 pillars of psychological safety are inclusion safety. So what does it look like for me to feel like I belong? And how do I create a sense of belonging where I go? Learner safety is, how do I give myself compassion and grace as a learner? But equally, how do I provide compassion and grace for others that are learning? Contribution safety is, how do I hold space for other people's contribution, particularly if they might be different to my perspective? But also, what do I need to feel comfortable and safe and confident to speak up and share my ideas? Because you never know what's going to have an impact. and challenger safety, which is, some people do some of these things well, but you don't have true, authentic, embedded psychological safety until you've got challenger safety. So what do I need to be able to speak up without fear that I'm going to get in trouble, or there's going to be an impact for myself? And how do I create that space for others? As a leader, how often are you asking for feedback? Have you had a conversation with your staff around what does feedback, if I need to give you feedback, Vanessa, how would you like me to give that to you in a way that's going to improve outcomes for you? Because that's the goal of feedback, is to improve an outcome, right? So how often do we actually ask our team, ask our staff, if I have to give you feedback, what way would you like me to deliver that, right? But equally, if something's not working, how do we create permission for ourselves to speak up, but also equally those on our team to speak up without fear that there's going to be ramifications and repercussions for that in the future? So psychological safety, because I feel like that's foundational to everything. Even for yourself to do that identity work, I really think that creating space for yourself to give yourself permission to do the work is key in that process as well.
Yeah, no, I can relate to all of that. I just love listening to you talk. It like you say, it's like, it's simple, but it makes sense, but it's the actual implementation of things and putting them into place every day, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So where can our listeners get in touch with you, Kylee?
Yeah, so they can find me on elementsforsuccess.com.au, and that's number 4, like not the FOR, it's number 4. And you'll find me on Facebook and Instagram under Elements for Success, and on LinkedIn you can find me under Elements for Success, or my name, Kylee, Kyleeleota.
Amazing. So get in touch with Kylee, book in some leadership training, book in some training for your team, yourself, the whole organization, to get things working more smoothly. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kylee, and sharing all of your wealth. It's been amazing having you.
Thank you so much for having me. Look, I could talk about this stuff all day. It's my passion piece. So thank you so much for holding space for me to be able to do that today. And hopefully there's an impact for those that are listening.